Good morning. Happy Wednesday. It's our last full week together of school. I hope you guys are doing well. I miss you. I hope you're taking care of yourselves. I hope you're reading some really great books. Um, we are still reading Front Desk by Kelly Yang. We're going to read a couple of chapters today together. I think I had planned to read. Let me just see. I think it was either 3 or 4. I'm going to try to read through chapter 30. We're on chapter 26 now. We're going to read through chapter 30. And then and I want to tell you something before I get started. So you guys know that your teachers went to school and packed up all of your things. I believe it was last week. So I took the opportunity to get into the library and organize things and get some things ready for next year for you. And I set up a display. Remember our round shelf that was in the middle that was new this year? I put all of the books that we book talk this year on that shelf. So we have My Weird School, Wish, I'm forgetting now the name, the Ivan book. We have Wonder on there. We have, goodness, there were so many great books, and I was so happy to see all the wonderful books we've read together or we've talked about together. Because our year was sort of cut short together at the library. Um, I know some of you didn't get to read some of those books, so they will be there next year when you come back. Um, so make sure that you pick those up. All right. So, and this one will also be on there as well. So here we go. You ready? Chapter 26. It was agreed that from now on, if we put the blue hat on the front desk, it means don't come in. Mr. Yao's there. And no hat meant come on in. We all shook hands on the new system, and Aunt Ling got into her car and drove off. I hoped she would tell us all her she would tell all her friends, and we would soon get lots of visitors who were heading in the direction of the 4 remaining addresses. Lupe was delighted to hear I was marching forward with my plan to show, not tell. She came over again the next day after school. The two of us sat at the front desk, where as usual, she proceeded to draw trees. Why are you always drawing those things? I asked her. Lupe didn't look up. Her eyes were completely focused on the page. Today she was drawing a massive oak with tiny little lines in the trunk. I like trees, she said, shading in the dark. Excuse me. She didn't like the trees. She didn't just like trees. She was obsessed with drawing them and was really good at it too. There was so much detail in her creations, hundreds of twigs, branches, and leaves, which she would labor over for hours. She pulled out a blank piece of paper from the fax machine. Here, I'll teach you, she said. I looked at her, weary. I wasn't exactly what you call artistic. My idea of a good portrait was a smiley face with sunglasses. You want to start off with a trunk, she said, pointing to my paper. I did as I was told and drew 2 thick lines for my trunk. Not so straight, she said. She took her pencil and started making little vertical lines, lumps, and curves in my trunk. No tree is perfect, remember that, she said. That's what gives it character. I smiled at Lupe and how grown up she sounded. It was one of the things I liked the most about her. She showed me how to add branches to my trunk. According to her, the easiest way to draw branches and twigs was to make lots and lots of tiny little V's. It was hard to work making all those little V's, and I got a little impatient, so I started shading in my tree, eager to get on with it. Don't rush, Lupe said, frowning at my shading and pointing to the tiny little twigs on her own tree. See, it's all in the details. We worked side by side for an hour, neither of us saying anything except occasionally to borrow the eraser. So deep we were in our drawings that We nearly jumped when Hank came and knocked on the door. I buzzed him in. Hey, can I have Mr. Yao's number? Hank asked. What for? I asked him. Didn't you say he had all those other motels? Maybe he needs a handyman, Hank asked. You said you want to ask Mr. Yao for a job? Excuse me, I asked. I glanced at Lupe. But what? Hank asked. He leaned into me. Come on, Mia, I'm desperate. I wanted to tell him it didn't matter how desperate he was. Mr. Yao was not going to go for it. Not after all the terrible things he said that night when the car got stolen. But then I got into Hank's eyes. I looked into Hank's eyes. He was the one who first wanted he was the one who first warned me about Mr. Yao. There's no way he would be asking me if he had any other option. So I dialed the number and handed him the phone. It's ringing, I told him. As Hank picked up the phone and started talking to Mr. Yao, oh, excuse me, guys. Ooh, we had a very late night last night. Um, anyway, as Hank picked up the phone and started talking to Mr. Yao, Lupe and I hopped off our stools and went to my room. Gently, I picked up the extension. Hi, Mr. Yao. It's Hank Caleb calling from the Cala Vista, Hank said. What do you want? Mr. Yao asked, barely hiding his irritation in his voice. I just want to call to see if you need a handyman at one of your motels. Hank said. Why? You know somebody? Mr. Yao asked. Yeah, me. Um, Hank told him. I spent a summer painting houses. I'm good with power tools. I know how to use pressure hose. Mr. Yao cut him off and told him flat out he wasn't interested. The answer is no, Mr. Yao said. But Mr. Yao, you didn't even let me finish, I interjected. I don't need to let him finish. There's nothing handy about Hank. Only Muffan, Mr. Yao said and hung up. I avoided Hank's gaze as I walked back into the front office. What's Mafan mean? He asked. I don't know, I lied. I couldn't bring myself to say that Mafan in Chinese meant trouble. Chapter 27. In school the next day, Mrs. Douglas gave us back our stories. I stared at mine lying upside down on my desk. Please read my comments, Mrs. Douglas said. I took a lot of time writing them. I've also graded your stories. A hand shot up. Did anyone get an A? Yes, of course, Mrs. Douglas said. Well, did anyone get a C? Stop fishing, Dylan, Mrs. Douglas said. All around me, my classmates started turning their stories around. I looked over at Lupe and watched as she turned hers over and had a smile. And a smile escaped on her lips. I looked down at my own story with a deep breath. I turned it around. There, plastered in red ink on the very top of my essay, was a big fat C minus. 12. That's the number of exclamation marks my teacher used to describe how bad my writing was. Check your grammar. Check mark, check mark, check mark. Tenses, Mia. Don't forget tenses. Check mark, check mark, check mark. You need to proofread. Check mark, check mark, check mark. I'm sorry, that was an exclamation point, not check mark. Exclamation points. The little minus sign on the sheet, you can tell I didn't sleep so well last night. The little minus sign on the top of the page, excuse me, winked at me, reminding me that C wasn't bad enough. It had to be a C minus. I stared at the red marks all over my story, a hot, bloody mess. In every sentence, there was something circled or crossed out. Why couldn't I ever get these tenses right? I could hear my mom's voice in my head shouting, because there are no tenses in Chinese, my mother was right. How could I possibly be as good as the other kids in their language? I should just forget about the essay contest. Who was I kidding? I didn't stand a chance. If I entered, it would just be $300 down the toilet. I stared at my classmates, drinking in their glee as they proudly waved their stories around. I couldn't stop looking at them, showing off their grades, grinning from ear to ear. I envied them with every bone in my body. When at last the school bell rang, I skulked home, my legs like jello, my feet cement blocks. The words, "You are never getting off your roller coaster," played in my head like a news ticker. I stashed my C minus story deep down in my closet when I got home, along with the essay contest printout I had been saving. I thought if I hid it, I wouldn't ever have to think about it again. But that afternoon, the cable was acting up again, and Lupe came over. So, what'd you get on your story? Lupe asked. I shook my head to her. I don't want to know, I mumbled. She shrugged. You don't want to know, I mumbled. She shrugged. Oh, come on, it can't be that bad, she said. I didn't say anything. Who cares? It's just a grade, Lupe said. You should have seen my grades when I first started going to school here. But it wasn't just a grade. It meant I was no good at writing. And how was I supposed to win a motel if I wasn't any good at writing? Before I could help it, everything came pouring out. Lupe's eyes bulged when she heard about the essay contest. For a second, I worried I had made a terrible mistake telling her. What if she applied for it herself? But then she reached over, took one of the guest comment cards, and scribbled something down. She handed me the card. I looked down at it. It said, "You can't win if you don't play." Sorry, guys. I looked back at Lupe. But it costs $300 to play, I reminded her. Lupe shrugged. My dad says in America, you gotta pay to play, she said. I looked at the window at her dad up on the roof, climbing down with all those thick wires around his shoulders. Suddenly, Lupe got quiet. What's wrong? I asked her. Nothing, she said. I knew it wasn't nothing, so I asked her again. I'll be sad if you move away to Vermont, she whispered. This almost knocked me over. It hadn't even occurred to me how she might feel if I won. She had to know there was no chance I'd win. I just got a C minus, remember? I thought this would make her laugh, but it didn't. Lupe just kept staring at the floor. She didn't even look up when her dad came in and told her it was time to go. See you tomorrow, I said. See ya, Lupe muttered. As she pushed open the front door office, she turned and said, Oh, and Mia? Yes, I hope you win. Her words warmed me to my toes. Chapter 28. When you moved school as many times as I have, you start to think of everyone as temporary. Friends come and go. You might have a best friend, but you know in the back of your mind she's not always going to be there. You'll change schools or she'll change schools, and that'll be that. For years I told myself that was okay. That was just the way it was. Kind of like replacing a toothbrush. Sure, you might like your toothbrush a lot, but sooner or later you'd have to replace it. You'd get a new toothbrush and it might feel strange and uncomfortable at first, but then you'd get used to it again. I guess I never thought about how a toothbrush might feel. I never thought the toothbrush might would miss me. I was walking through the motel still thinking about Lupe when my dad waved me over to room 8. Look what a customer left on the table. I stepped into the room and saw a $5 bill and three $1 bills lying on the table along with a note. To the little girl who checked us in, keep doing a great job. $8, my dad exclaimed. You know what that means? I smiled. Chinese people believe that if you receive $8, it's good luck. That's because the word for the number 8, ba, rhymes with the word for prosperity, fa. It was such a nice surprise that I went back to the front office to write the customers a thank you note. As I got their registration card out and copied down their address, it briefly crossed my mind that maybe I should stop. Given the grade I'd just gotten in English, did I really know what I was doing? But then I thought about Lupe and how she said you can't win if you don't play. I now had $8 more to play with, $8 that had just dropped down from the sky. I had to say thank you. I went over to Mrs. T's room to try to borrow a dictionary. Mrs. T was always reading. With her cat eye glasses, she sat by the pool and plowed through at least 2 newspapers and a magazine a day. Not only did Mrs. T have a dictionary, but she was delighted to lend me hers. It was a massive book, almost as thick as Yellow Pages. It wasn't just a dictionary either. It had something called a thesaurus, too. A thesaurus, Mrs. T said, was a list of words that meant the same thing as other words. You could trade them freely, like you trade one US dollar for 8 Chinese renminbi. That's Chinese dollar or Chinese money. I carried Mrs. T's nifty dictionary thesaurus over to the front office and started composing my letter. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Miller, thank you so much for the $8 tip along with a kind note. It made my day and I was having a bad day. I got a bad grade at school. It was so bad that I was thinking about giving up on something. But then two things happened. My friend from school said something nice to me and I got your note and tip. I think that's a sign, don't you? My parents are big on signs. I'm not especially if I'm not, especially if they are bad, but I like the good ones. Thanks for giving me a good sign, and thanks for staying at the Cala Vista. I hope you'll come again soon. Sincerely, Mia Tang, Assistant Manager. I worked with Mrs. T's thick dictionary thesaurus, trading words, looking things up, learning phrases like big on and made my day, crossing things out and trying things on until at last I was satisfied with my letter. I copied the letter over onto a clean sheet of paper, sealed the envelope, and placed it in the outgoing mail pile. Then I had another idea. If Mr. and Mrs. Miller were willing to give me a tip, maybe other guests would be as well. Who knew? Maybe if I saved up, I could save enough. I could have enough to enter the essay contest. I called up Lupe. That's a great idea, she said. You should totally do it. Lupe said everyone was always giving out tips in restaurants. Even her dad, if he did an extra good job, got a tip from his customers. Except Mr. Yao, of course. Mr. Yao never gave Lupe's dad a tip, not even on Christmas Day last year when he had to go over to his house to repair the cable. The tip jar would have to be a secret, though. Mr. Yao couldn't see it. If he saw it, he'd just take the money like he took everything else. I wasn't even sure I wanted my parents to see it. They still didn't know about the essay contest. If my mom knew, she might say I didn't stand a chance. And the last thing I needed was her telling me I couldn't do it. I hung up the phone and went to the kitchen where I found an empty plastic jar. I taped a post-it on the front of it and wrote the words tip jar. I added some stars for good measure. I put the jar on the front desk. I decided I would only put it out when it was just me. When my parents or Mr. Yao were around or when I was at school, I'd hide it under the desk. I lifted the divider and stood back to admire the jar. It looked good there. I went out the back to return Mrs. T's dictionary back to her. As I was walking across the parking lot, I noticed a couple I just checked in going up to my mom, who was walking back from one of the rooms. They were holding a camera. Excuse me, will you take a picture of us? The woman asked my mom. She grinned at her boyfriend. This is our first vacation together. Your first vacation? That's great, my mom said in her broken English. Vacation, the couple corrected. Anyway, will you take our picture? Sure, my mom said, taking the camera from her. The couple showed her which button to push, and I could tell my mom was tingling with the excitement because she kept running her fingers along the zoom. Finally, a real camera. As my mom put her eye to the viewfinder, the couple hugged each other and gave her great big toothy grins. Eggplant, my mom said, except she pronounced it eggplant. The woman frowned a little. You know, it's eggplant, said the woman after my mom put the camera down. What? Eggplant, the woman said, emphasizing the T so vigorously that she practically was spitting on my mom. I could feel the heat of my mom's embarrassment from where I was standing. If you're going to say it, you should say it right. And really, you should be saying cheese, the woman said as she walked off with her camera. My mom just stood there looking so sad I wanted to run up to tell her, hey, it's okay. I just got a C minus in my English story. I know how you feel. But I knew this would not make her feel better. It would only make her feel worse. It almost made me want to do more math. Chapter 29. Jason was back at school the next day. He hadn't been since the day in the auditorium. Mrs. Douglas still said it was because he was sick. I felt bad and was kind of worried about him, but now seeing him in his seat, glaring at me and snickering with some of the other kids, I saw that he was perfectly all right. He just had a bad case of the I hate Miss Mia's. Slowly, I walked over to my desk and took my seat beside him. He and his friends stopped talking, but I could feel their eyeballs on me. I could feel them sinking into my in, I could feel them sinking into my pants. I had on a pair of these thin floral pants my mom got from Goodwill. I'll admit it, they looked a lot like pajama pants, but they were $6.99 for a bundle of six, and you couldn't beat that. What a deal, my mom had squealed in the store when she spotted them. Your mom has the best shopping eyes. She had seemed so proud and so happy I let her buy them for me, and they were pretty comfortable, but now as my eyes slid over the other kids, all of them in jeans, I wondered if it was just a terrible mistake. I used to have jeans too. In fact, I boarded the plane in a brand new pair of jeans that my aunt bought me from for me in Beijing, but they were too small on me now, and a new pair of jeans cost $9.99. much too expensive considering how quickly I was growing. Since coming to the motel, I had grown a full inch, a fact not lost on Mr. Yao, who motioned with his greasy fingers every time he came over. See that growth? I paid for that growth. Hey, Mia, Jason said loudly. I looked over at him. He glanced at the other kids who were all covering their mouths with their hands, like they were trying to hold in some terrific inside joke. How come you always wear those pants? Jason asked. The other kids exploded with laughter. I shifted my body away from them. My pants, seconds ago so soft and comfortable, now felt scorching hot. Ignore them, Lupe said. We were sitting on the grass at recess. I glared at Jason and his friends, who were sitting on the other side, cracking up and pointing at me. They'll get bored and move on to someone else, Lupe said. Somehow I doubted that. And not 5 seconds later, Jason yelled at us from across the playground. Has she not heard of jeans? Jason hollered to thunderous laughter. That's it. I couldn't take it anymore. I got up only to be pulled back down by Lupe. Ignore, ignore them, she repeated. She was being very calm about the whole thing, annoyingly calm, if you ask me. Excuse me. If my cousin Shen were here, he'd be over there in 2 seconds. Back in China, if anybody picked on me in school, he would go up to them and give them a piece of his mind. He didn't care who it was, even if it was his best friend, a fidgety kid with glasses named Mo. Mo always liked to go up to me and pull on my ponytail. And one time he pulled too hard and I cried. Shen told Mo if he ever did it again, he'd pull his ear down to his butt. Mo kept his fingers to himself after that. I tried not to think about those memories. Instead, I tried to focus on the words Lupe was saying now. She was telling me about her grandmother in Mexico and how she was sick, so her mom was sending money home. That's why money was tight for their family. I nodded as I listened, trying hard not to look down, because despite everything she was saying, Lupe was still wearing jeans. I'm going to stop here, guys. I hope that you guys get to spend some time outside today because it's a gorgeous day. I hope you are doing well. I really miss you. Send me a message and tell me what books you're reading. If you're reading anything good, if you like our book. I'll post this video and then I'll try to post a couple of pictures from our library. I hope you're well. Come back and check the classroom either later this week or first thing on Monday morning. Take care of yourself, guys. Have a great day. Happy Wednesday, everyone.